Okay. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing for a Wednesday?
Doing quite all right.
Good. How are your
I
other
don't,
class? How are your other classes going?
They're definitely going. I think I'm just drowning a little bit.
Well, we're in the thick of things now, right? We're in week 5, right in the middle of the term. Most of you have 3 classes. So yeah, I'm sure it's very busy. How you doing on your organizational skills and your time management skills? So, Adriana says, so,
It's a work in progress.
work in
I was gonna
progress.
say mine's better than it ever has been. I'm usually a really bad procrastinator, but I've actually been better this term. So
Wonderful, Shayla. That's awesome. Do you have any tips for your teammates?
Please do share.
Please do share.
I have like a weekly planner, and so I plan my week out. So I know what's due on what day and I cross it out when I'm done. But I also just do stuff that I can get done early in the week so I don't have to worry about it later. And I can like have more time to study than just focus on my discussion posts and stuff. So I do all that first and then study.
Great.
I'm only taking 2 classes, so I'm pretty bored all the time.
You're bored?
Yeah, I get everything done so early. Like I've already done the project doing week 7.
Okay. Well, that's great. Wish I could say I was bored.
Not really bored, but not like revolving schoolwork all
Right,
the
right,
time like
right.
it's been for the past 2 years.
Of
But I
course.
decided to take med surge alone and community and pediatrics together.
Right, right. Wonderful. Anybody else have some organizational time management tips for everybody? Okay.
I really like my month at a glance calendar, like
Mhm.
it shows me the whole month.
Yep.
So
I use that all the time.
yeah, it just really saves me.
Yeah, I use that all the time. Yep. Okay. So a couple of things. Welcome to week 5. Next week is week 6 already, which is halfway through the term. Next week, you guys have an exam. Okay. This week are all the reviews. Okay, I just attempted to do a review about an hour ago, and I had nobody show up, so I didn't do a review. Anyway, so I hope you're all planning on trying to take advantage of the other reviews that are being held. Okay. I think I have, let's see if I can pull that up. Let's see. I think just to, can you guys see this? Whoops. Here's your reviews for this week. If you need to pull them up. Okay. Exam 2s are in green. All right, so I just attempted to do one here, though nobody showed up. There is another one this evening at 8 o'clock Eastern time with Professor Alani. Okay, there's one tomorrow. You guys all have this. There's one tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern with Professor Price. Then there's one Friday, one Saturday, and one Sunday. Okay. So I would highly encourage you to try and get to a live review or a few of them if you can. As I stated before, there really is an increase in exam scores with attending live sessions. So anyway, you've got one more tonight, did we say one Thursday? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay. And you have your exam 2 study guide, right? The exam covers weeks 3, 4, and 5. Everybody should have received the study guide. Okay,
I thought our exam was today.
no, it's in week 6.
I love that. Okay.
Okay. The other thing that was sent out to you this week is your HESI study guide. Right? Everybody get that? Okay, so here's my suggestion with that. It is really, really a big document. I think it's about 55 pages. Okay, do not be overwhelmed with the size of it, because this is a summary of 9-10 weeks of content. Okay, as we go through each week, you should be able to go into that HESI study guide and see the content, the concepts that we've covered. Okay, after every term, we review not the questions that were asked on the HESI, because we can't see the questions, but we can see the topics and the concepts that were asked about or covered. Okay, so your HESI study guide represents what's covered on the HESI. Does that make sense? So please, please, please do not wait until week 10 to open your HESI study guide, because it's going to be really overwhelming. All right, please take a peek at it, or flip through it and make sure you're confident about the content in there, at least for the topics that we've covered.
What do you
Yeah, I always
think about it in the book, like the HESI book that we get, the thin one?
Pardon me?
The HESI book that we get, the thin one, would you recommend us looking at that too?
Yeah, yes, but I would really, I would focus on the study guide we gave you, and then if there are concepts in that study guide that you're unfamiliar with or you need more to review better, then go to that book. But yeah, use that as a supplement. And then the other thing I would suggest, since we sent out the HESI study guide, and I think I put this in the announcement, please pull out your 3 exam study guides. You don't have 3 yet, obviously, but you have 1 and 2. Okay, so if you study your study guides and you study the HESI review booklet, you should do great on the HESI. Okay, but don't wait till week 10. And just a reminder, since we're talking HESI, week 10 classes are all HESI reviews. You have to come to this class on your scheduled day with me, and I do a HESI review during that class time in week 10. And then we will send out the schedule of all the other sections by all the other professors that week, and you can attend any more sessions that you want to. Does that make sense? But you have to attend this one, but I had some students last term that went to 6 or 7 sessions. So, and that will be available in week 10. So we finish up content in week 9. Okay. So like I said, don't wait till the last minute to look at that HESI study guide. Probably I'd say at least 25-30% of it right now we've already covered. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Case studies, your first group project that you guys turned in last week was absolutely fantastic. I didn't hear from any groups that were having issues with communication and participation. So your final papers were excellent. Really, really impressive. Okay, so great job to everybody for doing that. Really great job. I believe this week, what do we have this week? We have an NCLEX, I think, and a discussion question. Is that what we have this week? Let's see. Yes. Okay, so remember your initial post is due tonight. It's Wednesday. Right, and then you have till Sunday to do your 2 peer reviews. Alrighty. What questions do you guys have for me so far? How are you feeling?
I could not find your email to send you, like the next group project at what we're wanting to do it on.
Oh, okay. It's in my instructor page. But I can give it to you.
Okay,
Okay. It's K Marvel, Marvel, at fortiscollege.edu.
okay, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And yes, I already have heard from a couple of groups about what infectious disease they're going to do. So yeah, so keep that coming. So far, nobody, I don't have any requests for the same infectious disease. So far, so good. But you guys did a really good job on this first case study. Really good job. Any questions before we go into some content here? So today we're covering environmental health, occupational health, and epidemiology. Anybody do any prep work for the class today? Any readings or?
I skimmed the guide.
Okay. Okay.
I studied it all very thoroughly.
Yeah, I bet you did. I bet you did, Jeff. Hey, Jasmine, think about how prepared you're going to be for next week. Right? Okay. All right. So I have some notes I want to cover with all three topics. Let's see. Okay. And these are my notes, but I like to use them as a talking points. When you guys think of environmental health, what do you think about? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. What do you think about when you think about your community, the zip code you live in? What's
Like air
environment? Pardon me?
like air pollution or like what's in the air, what's
Think of-
around, like refineries.
Farming,
Say that again.
farming,
Farming.
like
right?
regulation with farming
Mhm.
and health department. Well, kind of health department too, because in some way. Well, in the environmental,
Mhm.
yeah.
Wouldn't this have to do with like workplace?
That's
stuff?
occupational
Okay.
nursing. We're going to
Mhm.
cover that next.
Okay.
So let's think about the environment you live in. Okay. Think about your own community. The four biggest environmental risks are air,
Water,
water, soil, and food. Right? So other than me, who takes for granted that the air is healthy? And somebody else worries about that. Who takes for granted that the water you drink is safe and doesn't have toxic? I do. Who takes for granted that when you go to a fast food or you go to a restaurant, that everybody that is near or dear to your food, preparing it, serving it, everybody's using the right protocol, right? And soil. So for me, I take all that for granted. I shouldn't, but I do. And I'm sure a lot of you do too. Right? But think about the environment we live in, each of our communities. Do we live near an airport? Do we live near a transportation hub? Do we live near a power plant, an incinerator, or a dump, or what am I trying to think of? A waste site. Do we live near a nuclear power plant? Do we live near trains? What else? Agriculture. Has anybody ever seen, Adriana, could you turn your camera on, please? Thank you. Has anybody ever seen the movie Aaron Brockovich? What's that movie about?
It's about the pollution that, it was a town that had like pollution poured into like the water and stuff like that, and they were getting cancers and all type of like,
Mhm.
like they were just messing up the people in the town and stuff like that.
Yeah. Right? So that was a complete environmental disaster with water pollution. And then think about what happened in Detroit several years, or excuse me, in Flint. What happened in Flint several years back? Flint, Michigan.
The water had lead in it.
Mhm, mhm.
I think, I mean, I don't know about now, but up to about a year ago, still had
Mhm.
lead in it.
Sure did. So think about your community nurse, you're out working in the community. Think about all the different environmental risks that we have. Think about everybody that lives in your community and all the environmental risks they have. All right, so let's go through some notes here. Let's talk about it. Okay, we know that environmental health hazards are responsible for over 1/2 of the total burden of disease in the world. They contribute to over 80% of communicable and non-communicable diseases and injuries. How do we establish or assess environmental health? We can establish it by genetics, socioeconomic status, environmental exposures. So socioeconomic, why would that matter? Well,
Low class
pardon me?
would be like the low class or like the
Yeah.
lower, like migrant workers.
Or those who live in poverty, right? Those who live in poverty are much more likely to be exposed to environmental hazards, maybe due to crowded living conditions, maybe living closer to hazardous sites, hazardous waste sites, having poor quality food, living closer or living in older homes with lead-based paint. Maybe living in districts where the schools and daycare centers are old, much more at risk for lead. Maybe there's genetic predispositions. Maybe there's a family history of developmental delays, autism, asthma. So how do we assess for environmental risk? 1 second, I'm sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So let's see. Okay. So how do we assess the patients or clients for environmental risks? All right. We need to know where they live, where they work, where they go to school, where they send their kids to school. Dietary. We want to assess their dietary intake. Why is it important to assess their dietary intake? What if they eat a lot of fish? What's the risk for that?
Mercury.
Mercury exposure. You know, when you go and do an environmental assessment, let's say you're new to your job in the community and you're asked to do an environmental assessment. Doing a windshield survey is an excellent way to do an environmental assessment. Do you guys know what a windshield survey is? It's exactly what it says, windshield. You're driving around the community within the boundaries, looking at what's around. Right? Whether it's through a car, whether it's through a bus, whether it's through walking. Okay, so that's a good starting point. Does the community you're assessing have factories, dumpsters, or dump sites, transportation we talked about? Is the housing new or is it old? Are there pest problems? Are people exposed to trash? You know, if you live in rural areas, do they spray pesticides and herbicides by air? Okay. And then lead-based paint. Okay, lead-based paint was, hang on one second. Whoops, sorry about that. Lead-based paint was used in homes before 1978. And what's wrong with, why is that a risk? Because kids put everything in their mouth. Right? Young kids may eat paint chips. Okay. Typically, the exposures come from older buildings, though, older homes, older schools, older daycare facilities that were built before 78. Okay. What do we know about exposure to lead-based paint? Some of the potential complications are premature births, learning disabilities, hypertension in adults. We know that, think about what we have in our home as far as cleaning supplies or gardening supplies, pesticides. We have pesticides in our home, schools, daycares, hospital, lawn, gardening, farms. Okay. We know that childhood leukemia is associated with prenatal exposures by parents, right, who are exposed to insecticides at work. Man-made chemicals we know are found in our bodies, including breast milk and the umbilical cord. Right, and then certainly exposures to toxic chemicals during fetal development could have potential problems, miscarriage, stillbirth, maybe developmental abnormalities, childhood cancer, autism, asthma, obesity, neurodevelopmental delays are all associated with toxic exposures. Okay. With regards to water, 30 million Americans drink water that does not meet the EPA's safe drinking water standards. That's a lot of people. Right? And we know that the quality of the water is tied to the quality of the soil and vice versa. Okay, we know that this quality of the soil is impacted by chemicals that are added by humans, the pesticides, the herbicides, fertilizer, right? And pollutants from the air. Okay. Water is contaminated by antibiotics and hormones in our meat animals. Okay. So a lot of issues with potential contamination of drinking water. 50% of Americans live in areas where the air quality does not meet the national standards. What's the biggest source of air pollution? What do you think?
Gas.
Cars, motor vehicles, greatest single source of air pollution by secondary or only secondary to burning of fossil fuels. Okay. And we know the air pollution is associated with asthma, respiratory disease, lots of things, cardiovascular disease, cancer, immune system disruption, reproductive health problems. Okay. Food. What happened? Food contaminants include pathogens, salmonella, right? Salmonella in chicken, E. coli. That's a big complication of food poisoning. Okay. I mean, as nurses, we need to promote using products and practices that do not harm human health or the environment. Right? What's toxicology? You guys know what the definition of toxicology is? So that's important in community health. Toxicology is a study of health effects associated with chemical exposures. And then we'll talk about epidemiology a little bit last, but epidemiology, this also is part of environmental health, right? So epidemiology is the scientific method that evaluates the incidence and distribution of diseases and is used to draw conclusions about the health effects of environmental exposures. And then we always have access to consumer confidence reports, or another word is right to know. Okay, you can actually go onto the EPA website, Environmental Protection Agency. You can go on that website and put in your zip code, and it will give you back in your particular area what environmental risks there are. Let's say you're doing a home health visit. Okay, we talked about lots of things on the outside. Air, well, that could be on the inside too, obviously, but you're going to do a home health visit, right? And let's say you're going to change a wound dressing. What else can you do within the home to do it? How would you do an environmental assessment in the home? What would you be looking for?
Sanitation.
Sanitation, exactly. What else?
Making sure like if they were making food and storing it, that it was stored at a proper temperature and time control.
Making sure the refrigerator's working, right? Electricity's on,
No fire hazards.
no fire
Running water.
hazards, clean water. What about the storing of chemicals, cleaning supplies?
Behind a lock or up high.
Mhm. What else can you assess?
Family
Envi-
dynamic if it is a family.
Pardon me?
Family dynamic if there is a family.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the family's living under the roof.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the takeaway is there's a lot of environmental risk and exposure to all of us in all of our communities, both inside the home and outside the home in the community. And so think about it, as a community nurse or a public health nurse, you're right in the middle of that. Right? Maybe part of your education, let's say if you live near a transportation hub, maybe part of your teaching, your education in the community is how to minimize your risk. You know, now we all have, when you watch on the news and have weather reports, they give, you know, for people with asthma, right? People with asthma have, you know, it's a higher risk today. Limit your time outside, right? Those are all geared towards alerting the public to certain environmental exposures or air, you know, air issues. Right? And same with the fire. I know in Colorado we have daily reports on it is safe to burn, it's not safe to burn. right? Again, air quality, having to do with environmental risks. Okay? Questions about environmental health. We have so many risks during the day, during any given day, environmental risks, that we really do need to be mindful of them if we're working out in the community. Okay, whether we're doing community-oriented nursing, which is looking at the whole community and what environmental risks present to the whole community, or whether we're practicing community-based nursing, which is working in the community with people, clients, groups of people that are affected by environmental hazards. Okay. Questions about environmental health. How often do you guys think about environmental health? Just curious. How
Not
often?
enough.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I mean, how often do you think about things like air quality, water quality, food, soil?
I work in a restaurant, so I think about certain aspects of that quite often.
Okay. And what happens? What happens if you don't follow the protocol for the way your restaurant operates?
Get dinged on your health inspection.
Absolutely.
I know like Florida is one of the worst places to live if you have like asthma or any kind of respiratory issues because of the air. Like it's so humid. And they also said that's why we had like one of the largest populations of like COVID whenever it did break out because of how fast it spread throughout the air being so humid.
Yeah. What other environmental concerns do you guys have in your own communities? What do you know? What do you know about your community?
When I was overseas, I was really concerned about the water. Certain places you should not drink the water. So I had to constantly buy bottles of water. And so it's been weird to be back in the States because still in my head, like I think that way, but I know most of our drinking water out of the faucets are okay to drink out of. But yeah, that was a
Yeah.
big one for me.
Yeah. Thanks,
We're getting
Shayla.
all of our stuff retested. We're
Pardon?
redoing our house, so we're getting all of our stuff retested as far as like water, soil, and our well and everything. So I think about that a lot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Can
Thanks, Miranda.
like what is that, a community that's growing too fast? I feel like the county that I live in is growing too fast. We're running out of resources for everyone.
So the infrastructure is not keeping up with the growing population.
Right. Like you can't even get your kids into a dentist unless you're driving like 3 hours one way.
Wow. Wow. What other environmental concerns are in your community? Okay,
Like
let's move on
trash.
to, oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Like trash everywhere, and like people don't pick up after themselves. And what me and my parents do, we just every once in a while, like every other week or so, we'll go out during the day and just pick up trash at random areas.
But think of the environmental exposure that creates.
Mm.
You know, if you look at some of these big cities that are having a significant homeless population issue, think of the environmental risks that poses to the surrounding community. Right? That's a huge one. Okay, next topic is occupational health. What is occupational health? What area does it focus on? Anybody in your workplaces ever had a visit from OSHA? What's
No,
OSHA?
but it's, they create the material data safety sheets. That's available for all employees at whatever place of work. And they also have standards for workplace environments too.
Mhm. And those material data worksheets, what are they?
It tells you how to properly use chemicals and what is in the chemicals. I mean, it has a lot of information on those sheets.
Where they're stored, how they're used, when they expire,
How they're disposed.
how you dispose of them.
Mhm.
So OSHA is big with occupational health. So we still haven't figured out when a nurse is an occupational health nurse, what's she doing? What's her responsibility?
Are you like analyzing someone's workplace?
The workplace. That's exactly what it is. Occupational nursing is the work site, the workplace. Okay, so there are specific nurses called school nurses. There are specific nurses called faith community nurses. There are home health nurses. There are hospice nurses, and there are occupational health nurses that focus primarily on the workplace. Okay, they do a combination of primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions. Okay, let's go to my notes here and see what we want to talk about with occupational health. Okay, so occupational health, oops, delivers health and safety programs to workers. It focuses on promotion and restoration of health, prevention of illness and injury, and tries to protect from work-related and environmental hazards. So the occupational health nurse is essentially responsible for the health and the safety in workplaces. Okay, so if we're looking at primary interventions from the occupational health nurse, remember primary is prevention. So I know in the school district I just got finished working in, we had a huge wellness department, health and wellness department. And anybody who works in large organizations probably has that as well. Right? So primary, preventing it, something before it happens. So an occupational health nurse may be involved in health promotion, maybe exercise fitness classes, smoking cessation classes, nutrition, weight control, immunization, stress management, work-life balance. Has anybody ever participated in any of those kinds of health promotion activities from your employer? Yes, no?
I have.
Well, those are probably from your occupational health department in your organization or occupational health team. Okay. So the other thing is the occupational health nurse also needs, one of her roles is the prevention of illness and injury. All right. So he or she is required to monitor for hazards in the work environment, such as toxic chemicals, noise, non-ergonomic work, such as standing, extreme temperatures, hot and cold, radiation exposure, crowding, stress and burnout, exhaustion. So let's think about that. Okay. She will need to know job descriptions. So if you work in a large organization, let's say you work in a hospital, think of all the job descriptions within that hospital. Lots. Think of every job in that hospital. Every job has a job description. Every job description has risks. Right? Let's say you're working in a, let's go through toxic chemicals. All right. So let's say you're working in a chemical plant and the workers are have exposure to toxic chemicals. Do they know how to protect themselves? Do they have the right PPE to use? Have they been trained? Let me take a step back. Everybody who starts a new job has to go through safety training, right? Is that right? Everybody has to go through whatever, whether it's proper lifting, safety training, right? So let's say you're working at a chemical plant. The occupational nurse needs to know what your job description is, because prior to you starting your job, you need to be educated on the risks and how to mitigate those risks. Let's say you work in a noisy plant. The noise levels are off the charts. The occupational nurse is responsible for knowing your job description and what you're going to be exposed to. So, do you know how to protect yourself from loud noises? Do you wear earphones? Are you routinely have your hearing checked? What about extreme temperatures? Let's say it's a farm. Or let's say it's in a freezer, in a meat packing, where you're working in freezer-like temperatures. Okay, what are your risks? The occupational nurse is responsible for knowing what risks are of extreme temperatures, hot or cold. How do you protect yourself? How can they help protect you? How can they help educate you? All right, and the other part of occupational health is the mental part of it, the emotional part of it. I mean, we talked about this in the last couple of weeks. Think about all the mental illness, right? The stress, burnout. I mean, people bring their issues to work, do they not? They do. And so the occupational nurse, how does she help struggling employees? In our district, in a lot of big places, we now have EAP programs. Anybody know what an EAP program is? Employee Assistance Program. It's pretty standard across the United States right now that employers provide EAP, Employee Assistance Program, so you can go and talk to about issues, any kind of issues, stress, burnout. Think about all the workplace violence now, right? So let's see. Does that make sense? We talked about noise pollution. Noise pollution is a common physical hazard leading to hearing loss. Back pain. We haven't talked about that yet. Back pain is a common complaint due to lifting strategies and workstation design. The occupational nurse needs to understand who's at risk for injuries due to lifting, right? Maybe workers complaining of back pain, maybe they need to be assessed for how they're lifting, right? Are they doing it correctly? Were they trained properly? Okay, maybe they need retraining. Maybe they need to be reassigned to a different position until their back is better and they can practice proper lifting techniques.
So what
Yeah.
are these nurses? Like, these are like, I'm sorry, you said these are like school nurses and hospice nurses?
Nope, this is
Or-
occupational nursing. I was just giving
Yeah.
you an example that we have in community health, we have school nurses, we have hospice nurses, we have home health nurses.
Oh, okay.
We also have occupational health nurses. And
So,
that's what we're
like,
talking about here.
where would they work? Like,
In the
an
work
example of,
setting.
like, where would they?
In the work
Okay.
set, they work in the work setting.
And they have
So,
to know that
like,
role.
Yeah.
when they do, so when I got hired on as my nurse extern, I had a occupational health nurse basically clear me so I was able to work.
Mhm.
So she checked all my shots,
Yeah.
did my fit test for my N95, and then
Yeah.
I had ankle surgery, so she had to clear me for that too.
Yeah.
So
You probably do you have to have a TB test as well.
yes.
Yeah. Yep. So it's pretty standard right now when you're hired on of what you need to be cleared for and what you have to have updated. And it's for the safety of the employer as well. right? Because the last thing employers want is injuries. 'Cause what do injuries mean? Workers' compensation, right? Where the employer is going to be responsible for the medical costs related to the injury if it happens on the job. So rather than paying for a gazillion back surgeries because people are improperly lifting or improperly using the correct technique, better to train people on the front end, right? That's just one example.
So my husband works for nuclear plants, so he has an occupational nurse.
Yep.
At that plant specifically that like takes them through the how much radiation they can have, what they can
Exactly.
do and everything too. So
Yep.
it's pretty big when it comes to nuclear power.
Yeah. That's what an occupational health nurse does. Whatever environment she's working in, whatever kind of work, whether it's a nuclear plant, a hospital, a school, whatever, they are responsible for understanding what the roles and responsibilities and the job description are for each and every employee. And they are responsible for doing the health promotion to try at health training to try and prevent any kind of injury or illness. Right? Every worker in should have protective equipment available for any kind of hazard. Right? Maybe hearing protection, eye guards, protective clothing. And like your husband probably has there's probably monitoring devices for radiation.
Yeah, they have those and then the big minion suits and
Yep. 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 So occupational nurses have several roles, right? They may be direct caregivers in the occupational health clinic. If the organization is big enough and they have a clinic, they may be educators. Okay, trying to teach and prevent, right? And there's certainly case managers. I don't know if we've talked about case management yet, but case management, nurses are often considered case managers because we are trying to manage somebody's case, let's say a case manager for a stroke patient. So you, the nurse, have to organize PT and OT and discharge planning and home health nursing. Case manager manages the case. So occupational health nurses are seen as case managers. Let's say somebody gets injured on the job. Okay, they are communicating with human resources. They're communicating with the workers' comp doctor. They are communicating with the getting released to come back to work. Okay, so occupational health nurses' jobs have expanded greatly in recent years. Okay, like we said, case management, coordination of care. Okay, case managers related to work or non-related work injuries, illnesses. Right, they're trying to help coordinate compensation, FMLA, short-term, long-term disability. This is what they're coordinating if somebody gets hurt or needs to take a leave. I know when I had to take a leave of absence a few times over my 20 years, human resources worked alongside occupational health. Okay. The other role that occupational health nurses do is counseling and crisis intervention. Okay. They may end up being counselors for employees that have substance abuse issues, psychosocial needs, health and wellness concerns, or work-related concerns. And they may be the ones responsible for managing these employee assistance programs, EAPs. mean, obviously the health promotion side of the occupational nurse, he or she would design programs that support positive lifestyle changes, individual efforts to lower risks of disease and injury, right? Try and provide the most beneficial environment that gives the employees a sense of balance amongst work and family, personal, health, psychosocial concerns. We talked about smoking cessation programs, exercise fitness programs, nutrition, weight loss. Our wellness department in the district, the school district did all of that. Okay. Does anybody work in an organization that does have a department that does all this health promotion activities?
I
And
used to.
do you take advantage of them?
Mm. Yeah, they had like screenings and then like a separate facility that we can go to for like workouts
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a bunch
yeah.
of different things that we can do throughout.
Exactly. Exactly. If you work in an organization or you go to work for an organization that has these services and resources available to you, take advantage of them. There's a reason that they offer that to you. Employers want their employees healthy so that they can provide do the best job at whatever their job description is. They don't want people working injured. They want to try and manage the stress and the balance and of employees, because then you're looking at issues with productivity, right? Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Occupational health nurses do require some additional education. Okay. Typically, let's see, nurses entering the field have a baccalaureate degree in nursing, experience in community health, ambulatory, critical care. I mean, what if you have an injury on the job? What if you're the occupational nurse in a place where there's risky equipment? Right? So the experience in ambulatory care, critical care, emergency nursing. Okay, many occupational health nurses have obtained master's degrees in public health, advanced practice. Okay. So here's a couple of examples of primary, secondary, and tertiary as it relates to occupational health. So teaching coping mechanisms, providing healthy diet education, educating on the use of ergonomic lifting or protective equipment. Do we understand why those are primary? Why are those primary?
You're teaching it so it doesn't happen.
Right. You're trying to prevent issues before they happen. A secondary screening would be screening for hearing loss. Let's say you work in a plant that is very loud. You know, how do you assess the individuals who might be at risk for hearing loss? Maybe screen them for hearing loss. Blood pressure screening for stress and burnout. Remember secondary, early identification, early intervention. How do we sort out the at-risk employees? Okay. And then tertiary, something has happened. There's been an injury, there's been an illness. So one of the things the occupational nurse might be doing is trying to assign an employee maybe limited duty. Has anybody ever heard of that? Going back to work on limited duty. Okay, as if the worker is recovering from an illness or injury. Right? Let's say they've had a wrist injury or broken hand. Provide illness or injury specific education, such as the use of a wrist splint or carpal tunnel, or use of a back brace if they've had back surgery or have back issues. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about occupational health? Really important role of a community nurse if you're an occupational health nurse. You're responsible
Did-
for a lot.
Did you say that they had to have a bachelor's or a master's, or they could have both?
They have a bachelor's and many of them are working or have their master's degree. Many occupational nurses are advanced practice nurses
Okay.
with a wide variety of clinical experience, emergency care, critical care experience. And think about it. Think about a big, diverse corporation or organization. Anything can go wrong. Anything. Right?
And you said those were primary, secondary, and tertiary of the occupational nurse role, basically.
I went through some of the interventions an occupational health nurse may do with regards to primary, which is prevention. So teaching, training, teaching how to properly lift, training on anything specific to their job description, protective equipment. So you're trying to prevent something before it happens. Secondary, screening your at-risk employees, right? So let's say you have a group of employees that work in a plant that's really noisy. We know they're at risk, right? So maybe we do routine screenings for their hearing to see if there's any issues. And then tertiary, maybe they've had an injury. So the occupational health nurse needs to work with the client who has the injury. Maybe it was a back injury. Are they properly wearing their brace? Are they wearing a brace? What were the physician's orders of returning to work? Well, the occupational nurse probably wants to see that, right? To make sure the employee is complying so they don't re-injure their back. Right? Guys following along with occupational nursing? Occupational nurses they are really, really key team player in any organization. They really are. We want to keep people healthy and they want to keep people at work. They don't want people to be sick, sitting at home, or injured, sitting at home. Right? Okay, the last topic I want to cover for this week is epidemiology. Who's excited about epidemiology? You either get it or you don't. Epidemiology is a little bit wordy, it's kind of confusing, but let me try and summarize it for you in terms that we can all understand. Epidemiology plays an important role in community nursing. And I'll just give you my example as a school nurse. Let me try and make it simple. I was always doing epidemiological things as a school nurse. For example, tracking pertussis, if we had cases of pertussis, tracking lice, if we had cases of lice, who, what, how did it happen, when did it happen? Chickenpox. Okay, so believe it or not, when epidemiology is the tracking of health issues and how we come up with a plan to stop the spread or protect others. Okay, and think of COVID. Okay, I know it doesn't, when you say the nurses, there is a role of epidemiology in community nursing, there is. That's just a fancy term for tracking things, tracking incidents, tracking events. Okay, let's go a little bit more specific here, because there's a few things about epidemiology that we need to know. Oops. Okay. All right. So when we think about epidemiology, when we think of the nursing process as well, care of clients, families, and population groups in the community use the following steps of the nursing process. ADPI, assessment, diagnosis, planning, implementation, evaluation. When we use the nursing process, epidemiology provides baseline information for assessing needs, identifying problems, designing appropriate strategies to evaluate the problems, setting priorities, develop a plan of care, and evaluating how effective your care is. That's the nursing process as it relates to epidemiology. Okay. So as far as the definition of epidemiology, health is a core concept in nursing and epidemiology. Health in itself. A holistic approach to health, including the incorporation of epidemiological principles, is particularly appropriate for nurses in the community. So here's what it's defined as. Epidemiology, the study of the occurrence and distribution of health-related statuses or events in specific populations. Okay, so think COVID. Okay, it's occurrence and distribution. What's going on and how is it spreading? Okay, so there's two types of epidemiology. We have an analytic and a descriptive. Think about analyzing. We would do that first. Analyzing is the who, what, where, when, how. Nope, sorry. That's descriptive. Description, who, what, where, when, how. Who is the population it affected? What happened? Where did it happen? I think your discussion question this week, is this the case study at the university? Yeah. So this is your epidemiological outbreak. Right? So you have an outbreak at the university and you're asked a bunch of questions. Right? Is this an outbreak? How are you going to instruct the students? Who do you need to contact? Okay, so this is your discussion question this week is about outbreaks, and outbreaks have to do with epidemiology.
So would like an example be like obesity among a community? Would that be part of like epidemiology if you're like tracking it, like say like obese in children in a community is
Sure.
going up?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Remember, occurrence and distribution. Okay, so if you, let's say in my high school, I had done a risk assessment of already obese kids. I then put together a program for them. Right, and I went through the whole nursing process. The assessment was, who are they? What was the plan? What was the implementation of the plan? What were the goals? How did I evaluate the plan? Right? Walking groups, they had journals of how much they walked or how they reduced their calories. That's an epidemiological study. Even though I didn't call it that, I was the health educator, the nurse at the high school, realized we had a pretty big epidemic of obese kids, and it was voluntary, where a lot of kids signed up. Okay. So let's go back to outbreaks. So descriptive. Who is affected? What happened? Where, when, and how? Okay. And then once you have all the descriptive information, then you analyze it. That's why it's called descriptive and analytic. In analyzing it, you ask the question, why? How and why? How did this happen? Why did it happen? Okay. That's the basic difference between analytic and descriptive. Does that make sense? And I'm not going to get into it much more than that because I don't want to confuse you. Okay, there's two ways. You have to get all the descriptive information first. So we know that outbreaks happen, patterns of illnesses happen. But we have to understand more specifically, like I said, who, what, where, when, how. And that's what your discussion question is giving you. They give you the who, the what, right? You have all that. Now you're asked to analyze it. Okay? Does that make sense? The next thing I want to talk about with regards to epidemiology, it's called the epidemiological triangle. Okay? There's three parts to that triangle: the agent, the host, and the environment. Let me read you a little paragraph about this. Epidemiologists understand that disease results from complex relationships among agents, hosts, and environmental factors. Okay, changes in one of these elements of the triangle can influence the occurrence or decrease the person's risk for the disease. I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute. Okay. Here's the definitions of the three of them. So the agent is the bacteria right here. I'm looking here and I'm looking here. The agent is something must be present for somebody to get infected. So an agent could be an infectious agent, a bacteria, a virus, a fungi, parasites. Could be a chemical, exposure to heavy metal, toxic chemicals, pesticides. Or it could be some kind of a physical agent, exposure to radiation, heat, cold, machinery. So there has to be something. There has to be some kind of an agent. I always use COVID as an example. Okay, COVID is your agent. Strep throat is your agent. Chickenpox is your agent. Viral pneumonia is your agent. You have to have something. Okay? The host is us. Who is affected? Right? Living species, human or animal, capable of being infected by the agent. Okay? Some examples of the host. Well, not examples of the host, but some examples of different issues with the host. Okay? Genetic susceptibility. So think about the host. Think about COVID. Think about who is most susceptible for COVID. The elderly.
Autoimmune.
Pardon me?
I said the same thing.
The elderly, the immunocompromised, the people with comorbidities. Those all affected how sick or not sick the host got. Would you agree? So there's several factors that the host you have to take into account. Genetic susceptibility. Let's say they have a genetic condition that's passed on that causes them to be immunocompromised. Okay, maybe your age. We found with COVID, the older you were, the more at risk you were. Okay, maybe whether you're male or female, depending on the agent, it's going to impact males more than females or females more than males. I already said your immune status. Maybe lifestyle issues. If you're obese, if you have comorbidities, that's all going to affect how you're affected by the agent. And lastly, the environment. How does the environment play into this equation? because you have to have all three. Right? So let's talk about COVID. If you were in a long-term care facility, if you were in crowded conditions, were you more susceptible to getting it? Yes. Okay, what are the environmental influences? Okay, so here's some examples of environmental influences: climate, temperature, plant and animal life, agents, reservoirs, habitats, crowding, socioeconomic factors, education, resources, jobs, access to care, working conditions, levels of stress, noise, satisfaction. So think about that. Somebody play out a scenario for me. Give me an agent. Tell me who the host is and what kinds of things might affect the environment. I just went through it with COVID. Let's go through a couple of examples because I want you to understand these three. It's going to be on your exam. So let's do a scenario.
You want us to do it or you're gonna do it?
No, you do it. I want you to go through, pick
The
an agent.
An
Pardon
elderly
me?
person, pneumonia and long-term living facility.
Is going to be very high risk. Right? Okay, so let's take pneumonia. Let's put it into a high school student, high school athlete. Lower risk for getting super sick from pneumonia? Probably.
Yeah.
They're healthier. Right?
And they're active as well.
Exactly. Okay, so there's two completely different scenarios. We have the same agent. We have a different host. High school healthy active kid versus an elderly in a long-term care facility. They're both going to experience that pneumonia differently. Right? I'll go back to my COVID example. Let's say you have young kids in elementary school, healthy, and then compared to a long-term care facility with very elderly people. Are the younger kids going to come out a little bit better with their exposure to COVID? Of course they are. Make sense? Let's just do a few more. Give me some examples. Okay, let's say you are working on a farm. You're a migrant working on a farm. So the agent is the heat. Okay? Who's the host? Let's say the host is,
Someone taking medications vulnerable to heat.
there you go. Versus somebody who's not. And so there are going to be different outcomes of the exposure to heat. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's your epidemiological triangle. And one of the important things I want you to remember is, I know we say up here, what is the web of causality? Where is that? We have right here, definitions of agent, host, environment, web of causality. That's going to be on your exam too. What that means is that, think about agent, host, environment. It's just a big web, right? Where any kind of scenario is going to affect something, and they're all interrelated. So let's say you have a light strand of the flu or a heavy strand of the flu, right? That's going to affect the host. It's going to, and depending on what's going on in the environment. So I guess what I'm saying is, between these three, you can come up with tons of scenarios, right? of who's going to get through it maybe unscathed, who's going to get really sick and maybe at risk for dying. And that's the web of causality, which means that these three are all interrelated and can look differently with every agent posed. Make sense? That's what the web is. And then let's see. The last thing I want you to know, this is still in epidemiology, is a case fatality rate. Okay, so case fatality rate. So it's basically the proportion of people diagnosed with a particular disorder who die within a specific period of time. Okay, so the case fatality rate is considered the estimate of the risk for death within that period. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say somebody says to you, I was just diagnosed with breast cancer. Am I going to live for 5 years? Okay, the case fatality rate determines over 5 years of your 100 cases of breast cancer. Let's say 50 will die in 5 years. So your case fatality rate is 50%. Does that make sense? And the reason why we bring this up is because people diagnosed with a particular disease often want to know the probability of surviving. Let's say with cancer, some kind of a really really important disease, a cancer, or they've had a heart attack, or they need open heart surgery, or, what are their chances of surviving? Well, the case fatality rate provides that. You could do it over a year, you could do it over 5 years, you could do it over, how many cases of that particular diagnosis or condition have died within the last year. Let's say you have 10 people that were diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, and 9 of them have died within a year. So the case fatality rate is 90%. Right? And then the other thing that I want you to know about is go into your book. Well, actually, prevalence. What's risk and prevalence? What's risk? Risk is the probability that something will happen, right? I risk driving in my car every day. What's the probability that I'm going to get in an accident or somebody will hit me? So risk, we are taking risks all the time. Not just as a student nurse, but in our personal lives and our work lives. We're always taking risks. What's the risk? What's the probability that something's going to happen? Prevalence is how often it happens. Is it prevalent? Is it not prevalent? I want you to go back into chapter 10 and read about risk and prevalence. There's a pretty extensive paragraph about risk and prevalence. Okay, so you need to understand the difference between those two. Okay. So, helpful information? Did you learn a lot today? Again, it's just branching out your knowledge to just how big this umbrella of public health is. Probably before you started this class, you didn't think about all these things, right? Like the occupational health nurse in the community. Or all the environmental risks that are right under our nose that we often don't think about. And then just a short discussion about epidemiology and how it plays a role in community health. So, anybody have any questions about any of these three topics?
So, when you're talking about the percentage, is there, and you said people do it over, so many years. So who sets up those statistics? Like, who does that?
I'll show you something. Hang on a second.
Is it like people that are doing research on it, or is
Yeah.
it like,
Well,
and
it's
then
public.
how do they come together with, like, because they could have varying results. I didn't know.
One sec. I'm pulling up. Pulling this up in your book so I can show it to you. Okay. I'm on page 173 in your book. Here's where I want you to read about prevalence, proportions, risk. Okay. I'm going to go to the table 10.2. I want you to take a look at. Okay. This may help explain it a little bit better.
Can
I'm
you
down
describe
here.
the web to me again after you get done?
Pardon me?
Can you explain the web to me when you get done?
Sure. Okay. Everybody see that? Case fatality rate. Let's talk about this. Number of deaths from a specific disease in a given period of time, divided by the number of people diagnosed with the disease. Okay, page 176. So an example, if 87 out of every 100 persons diagnosed with lung cancer die within 5 years, the 5-year case fatality rate is 87%. Right? And then the 5-year survival rate would be 13%. You guys understand that? Think about it, case fatality rate. So the case is your diagnosis, fatality is survival, and whatever you want to put in there, 1 year or 5 years. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. In this example, they're using 5.
Oh, okay. I understand now. I get it.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. Let's go up and see the epidemiological triangle is. Here we go. So if you want to read more about the epidemiological triangle, it's on page 178. There's your agent, host, and environment. Here's your examples that we just went through. I want to go to the web of here's your web of causality. Let's see if we can do this in simple terms. Okay, the term web of causality recognizes the complex interrelationships of the many factors interacting that increase or decrease your risk for disease. Does that make sense? So what it's saying is your agent, host, and environment have very complex interrelationships between each other, and they either increase or decrease the risk of disease or the way you respond to it. Does that make sense for whoever asked that question? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank
Yeah, you're welcome. So anyway, all the notes I've gone through, it's all in your book. I'm just trying to pull out important parts. I'm trying to pull out important parts that are on your study guide. You'll see a lot of what we covered today in your study guide. Okay. So now you have your whole study guide should be familiar to you. You have weeks 3, 4, and 5. So what I would do is I would go back to your study guide and make sure as you start preparing, make sure that it's broken out into different concepts. Vulnerable populations, I think there's epidemiology, there's the faith community nurse, there's an occupational nurse section. Go under the bullets for each of those sections and just make sure that you can articulate those, right? Make sure you could put it into practice if you needed to. Okay, if you don't feel like, if you get to, did I save it? No. If you get to a bullet under vulnerable populations and it's about migrants or farm workers and you're, oh, I remember covering that. Go back to your notes, go back to your readings and get yourself caught up. Okay, because if you can articulate and really understand, not memorize, but understand these bullets under each of the sections in your study guide, you'll do fine on the exam. I said that last time. And it same goes for this time. The study guide is an excellent springboard, I guess is what I'm saying. Springboard to start your preparation. If you get through the study guide and say, I don't have a clue here, then you got a lot of work to do. Okay. But you go back to your readings, you go back to your lectures, right? Go back to your notes, and everything should be covered. Make sense? You'll be good. I need everybody to step up for exam 2. Okay, next week is midterms. Okay, so after next week, you don't have the opportunity to bring up your grade until week 9. And I'm going to turn on homework. Okay. Next week or at the end of this week, I'll turn on homework so you can see how your homework's affecting your grade. Okay, that's all I have for today. It's good to see everybody. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. All right.
Thank
See you later. Miranda, hang on one second. Hang on. Give me 5 minutes, okay?
Yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
give me 5 minutes.
Okay.